Okay, so now we are going to talk about one very important aspect of security and digital security in general as well, which you usually don't think about, and that's attacking humans. There are lots of attacks against systems which basically are based on attacking the humans instead of the technology. So we're going to talk about social engineering in general and talk about some sub areas of social engineering like phishing. So we'll talk about this area in general and highlight the problems it causes. And you've probably encountered some of these things before. So basically, it's as Bruce Schneier once said, only amateurs attack machines, professionals target people. And yeah, in theory, if you encrypt your laptop with good cryptography, yeah, then it should be safe. However, it's usually protected by a password, since you're supposed to use the laptop at some point. And then they can simply take a wrench, as in the example of this comic strip, and beat the password out of you. And that's how it might work. And well, in practice, it's usually not as brutal. There are some easier, less violent, and definitely less noticeable ways that you can do this. And it all basically boils down to usability. That's at the core of this problem, usability of the technology. So a few years ago, I had a class in information security, and in that class we had a project, and I had two students who wanted to go more in depth on social engineering. And what they did was they made a social engineering attack against the help desk of the university. And basically what they did was they changed my password by calling help desk, and help desk changed the password for them. So basically what they did was this: they took a few courses. So they asked the teacher of another course to book a room for them to work on a project in that course. And so then they had a room, and this particular room actually had a phone in it, so a local phone that they could use. So they had made sure that they got such a room. And then they researched my background information. So they basically knew all the information about me that help desk could possibly know about me too. And then they called help desk from this booked room using an internal telephone. And what they did was they told help desk that they were going to do some teaching, and the lecture that they were supposed to give was supposed to start a few minutes ago, but they couldn't log in. And then during this stressful situation that they had artificially constructed, help desk reset the password so they could log in. And yeah, that's the human factors. So the reason it worked was because they were well researched, they were well practiced, they created a credible, stressful situation, which makes the human bypass some of the security barriers that are normally in place. Because help desk is there to help, and then they want to help as quickly as possible. And yeah, it's part of human nature to do this. So basically, you really need to train yourself to be a real prick and to not fall for this type of social engineering attacks. The main problem that we have is basically that our natural protection has developed over millions of years, and that's based on here and now. I mean, face to face, seeing a person. So if you're supposed to trade a bag of flour against a piece of meat, then if you see that the guy you're trading with doesn't have a piece of meat, then most likely he's trying to cheat you. So that's the type of protection that we are developed for. I mean, this was developed over millions of years. However, the threat that we're facing now is due to technology that has changed during only the past decades, and evolution is not that fast. So we really need to be conscious about these things, and really train ourselves to get a correct behavior. But even then, it might actually be quite hard. So, for instance, there are a few examples. So, one subpart of social engineering is called pretexting. And that's to call someone who has access to some information that you're interested in and pretend to be someone authorized to know it. So, for instance, you pretend to be a physician in another hospital, and there is an urgency with one patient, so he needs some information from the patient records. And there is a study from '96 made by Anderson in the UK, and basically they trained staff at the hospital to spot pretexting attempts. And I mean, now they only train staff at one place, and not the entire hospital, but a particular place in the hospital. And after that, they actually discovered 30 false calls per week, which is quite a lot. And this was back in '96. Another example was there was a false press release saying that the CEO of a company had resigned and the profits would be recalculated. And due to this hoax, the stock dropped more than 60% before the hoax was revealed. Now, another example. In 2007, there was an audit at IRS in the US, so the American Internal Revenue Service. Basically, what they did was they called 102 users across the organization, and they asked them to change their password to a given value. And it was 62 of them that actually followed the instruction. Now, this is pretty bad from a security perspective, because if you want to attack an organization and you call around a few users in that organization and you ask them to change their password, as long as one of them follows the instruction, you get an account that you can log into and you have a foothold inside the organization, and then you can start working from there. In this case, it was 50% of the people they called, a bit more than 50% actually, closer to 60%, actually follow the instruction. That's quite a high probability of success for an attacker who just wants to have to get an account in the organization. And then once they have a valid account in the organization, they can start working from there, because then they can get the data, like maybe read emails and see how they are doing, and construct legitimate looking social engineering attacks against colleagues to get maybe higher privileges in the system. Now, this type of attack that I've given several examples of, this is what constitutes social engineering. Basically, that you use the social aspects of humans and use that to your advantage as an attacker, and engineer specific situations which allows you to bypass security, and it's all due to humans. Now, military organizations, they have always targeted each other like this. So they train their staff and they could keep alertness through attacks. So constant attacks, and if the other military organizations of other nation states didn't attack them, then they could do attacks themselves. Civilian organizations like banks, they can also train their staff like this. However, for them, it's they have another aspect to it all, and that's all their customers, because it's difficult to train all their customers to be protected against this type of attack. And this must basically be solved through good usability. And by usability in this case, I mean security usability. Security and usability must be aligned. So think about it. I mean, how do you know that the card terminal that you use to pay in the supermarket is actually legit? Now, the probability that it's an illegitimate card reader sitting there, probability is very low. But I mean, you should basically determine, because I mean, if it's not a legit card terminal, they can skim your card and steal some money from you. So it's in your interest to know this, and sort of you're expected to know this. And the same thing, I mean, how do you know if it's a phishing URL or if it's marketing using a service to track clicks? I mean, you've probably received a bunch of newsletters, and probably a lot of them has links in them with URLs which are not even remotely related to the URL of the company sending the newsletter. So it's so a lot of things are designed in a way which really doesn't align with this problem. So it's like made for making users vulnerable. So probably you don't know the difference like everyone else. So it's really difficult to do this. So in summary, this technology makes it easier to attack customers. So you move the problem somewhat instead of attacking the organization, which still happens. You also get a huge attack surface by being able to attack the customers or individual users. And usually in the case of phishing, these attackers, they reuse real emails and they just change the URLs. And the attackers, what they want in these cases are data like usernames, passwords, or personal information that they can use to feed into one of these social engineering attacks against the organization that they are interested in. So you can try, Google has a phishing quiz, which gives a few nice examples of what phishing might look like and how to detect it, at least in Google's products. So you can try that one and see how well you do. However, they don't have these examples I was talking about where the organization sends a newsletter or something, and then they use these click tracking services to see how users click and read their newsletters. And that's quite crucial because those can really easily send you in the wrong direction. So we'll wrap up with a final example, which is more elaborate. This was in 2012, and it was Matt Honan, writer for the magazine Wired. So it's a technical journalist for Wired. And he had a personal incident, and he wrote one article about it, and someone else wrote some other article about it too. Basically, what happened was that attackers took over and removed his Google account. And they also took over his Twitter account and posted some unfriendly comments to Twitter, which was not particularly representative for his opinions. So like racist comments and things like that. And they also took over his Apple ID account and also removed all the data from all his Apple devices because they could do this. And how did they succeed with this? Well, basically, it was due to some incompatibility in the security design of Amazon and Apple Care. So Apple Care is the customer service of Apple. At least that's what they were called back then. So basically, what happened was that both Amazon and Apple used the credit card numbers to verify the user in case they had forgotten their password or something like that. So the incompatibility was like this. So Amazon had designed their system in a way that if you had forgotten your password to your Amazon account, you could call Amazon customer service and they would authenticate you by asking you, okay, so what's the credit card number that's registered with your account? And that one you usually still have. So then you could just read that one to them, and then they would reset your password. So so Amazon had a vulnerability in this sense because you could actually register a new credit card with your Amazon account without authenticating. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, how bad could it be? You can register a new credit card that you can shop for, but you need your password to sign in and shop for it. So if someone registers their card in your account, I mean, you can shop on their behalf. I mean, they pay. I mean, that's just an advantage for you. So, I mean, no one would do that, so that's not a problem. But the problem was that what these attackers did was they registered a new card and then they called Amazon customer service, say, hey, I forgot my password. Okay, they said, so what's the credit card number registered to your account? And then they simply read the credit card number that they had just registered. And once they had reset the password, they could log into Amazon, and then they could see some digits of the previously registered credit cards. And the problem here was that Amazon showed the few digits of the credit card that Apple's customer service used to authenticate users that had forgotten their password. So now that they could see these digits in Amazon, they could call the Apple customer service and ask them to reset the password so they could log in there. And suddenly they had Matt Honan's Apple credentials, so they could log in to using Apple ID, and then they could, of course, handle all his devices, and then that's when they remove the data. So in this case, Matt Honan had an email address with Apple here so that they could access that was linked to his Google account as well. So they could simply reset the password on Google, on Gmail, and then they would get the password through this Apple account that they had just gotten. And then his Twitter account was connected to his Gmail account, so then they could simply do the same for Twitter. So they made a password reset, so then they could get the Twitter account as well. And this is probably the situation for quite a lot of people. So, I mean, he was exposed because, yeah, I mean, he's a journalist, so he's famous, and someone had figured this out, so they wanted to pull a prank, and they did. And quite successfully remove his Apple devices. So that's an example of humans in the system. So the problem here is a bit of usability, a bit of humans, and a bit of security design in the case of Amazon and Apple. And the problem here is that basically third-party service, somewhere completely else, could ruin the security for another service. So although they are really independent, their security design was not. So they ruined each other's security there. And that's everything for this session. Thanks a lot.